I'm teaching at, oh, you might know I'm teaching at Bowie State.
Yes.
I can't believe that after spending 25 years at the NAB, retiring in 2004, that I'm in my 16th year of teaching communications at Bowie, and I'm teaching 5 courses a semester, 2 graduate courses and 3 undergrad. I have no life, but I'm at the sort of at the I'm seeing the new generation, Generation Z, and it's frightening. I feel that we're losing nearly a whole generation of history through this generation.
Why is it frightening? Yeah.
Well, because I have some excellent, brilliant students, but they're from the standpoint, I think, of most of us here, they're exceptions. You know, maybe 3 out of 3 or 4 out of 10. With their, you know, with all the technology that they have at their I say it, their disposal, intellectual curiosity is not one of the things that they value. It's not one of the great values that they have.
Well, Jackie was just telling us earlier about this new idea about how to engage kids before they grade, I guess, when they start to lose interest. I'm not going to ask them to repeat the whole thing again, but but there are people thinking about this. That's what.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's 7 o'clock. Excuse me. It's 7 o'clock, so I think we're going to get started.
Okay.
Make sure everybody's up to speed and everything. Okay. 7 p.m. Yes, Eastern time. Welcome to the Journal-isms Roundtable, everybody. My name is Richard Prince, and I write an online column called Journal-isms. It's journal-isms.com on diversity issues in the news business. This roundtable is an extension of that. We started the roundtable in 1999. You remember that far back, when a friend of ours was leaving to pursue a doctorate. She said, "Keep these going," and we have. We've met every month in various restaurants in Washington, D.C. until the COVID pandemic, when we switched to Zoom. Our participation multiplied, and we hope to have more roundtables that are hybrid, that is meeting in person, as well as having people attend by Zoom. I think we've had 4 of those so far. We think of this as an online dinner party. You supply the dinner. With purpose to network and to learn. Some of the networking takes place in the chat room, so please feel free to use it. All comments are on the record, and we ask everybody to be respectful of other people's time. So please try to be succinct and to the point. Our topic tonight is, who will be next? And what are you going to do about it? What journalists can do to survive the collapse of the traditional business models. Find the successful operations, go to the nonprofits, start one yourself. We have some experts with us who can speak to that, and we hope to hear from them soon. Now, I also see Kevin Merida. I want to send a special welcome to Kevin. He has to leave sometime soon, so I think if anybody has any questions for Kevin, or if Kevin wants to say anything now, I think we'll make time for that right this second. So, Kevin, anything you want to say?
You know, I'm here to listen. You've assembled a great panel. I think
excellent.
The future of journalism is important. You know, and we're going through some technological changes and economic changes in our industry, and I think AI being, like, in my view, kind of like the advent of the internet. Really, I mean, that it's going to be that big and that disruptive, and I think it's important to really be sophisticated about that. But I think I see Tracy Powell on here. I mean, I think there's a lot of really great promise in the nonprofit space, not all nonprofit. There's not one single model, but I think the fact that there are a lot of people in the philanthropic community, the civic community interested in preserving journalism and evolving it and funding it is a big thing. You know, it doesn't have to all be billionaires, you know, though I support billionaires with the right sensibility to own and if they take it seriously. But I think we also have to look at, and this will be the last thing and I'll get off the floor. I think we also have to, there's a lot of talk about the economic models broken, but we've got to look at actually what we deliver to communities and really get closer to the customer. You know, that's as big as anything. Like we got to deliver work in a way that people deliver work that they want and deliver it in ways that they want it, and really pay attention to that and not be so caught in convention and be afraid to change exactly how we deliver it and present it. And I think that's as big a part of the problem we have. It's not just the financing of it. It's like we've got to, if people don't buy something, there's a reason they don't buy it. And you sell bicycles, they don't buy your bicycles, but they go over there and buy someone else's bicycles. There's a reason they do that. And so we got to pay attention to that. And I think that needs a lot of attention.
Here, here. But I do wonder though, whether one of the questions that I guess we'll discuss is how much the customer really and the content really count, rather as opposed to the strict finances of it. In other words, if you have 1 million readers and no advertisers, can you still succeed? And if all your advertisers have gone to the internet, what does that mean? And so that's something on the table. But I want to start with Danielle Coffey because she's got her pulse on the industry as president and CEO of the News Media Alliance, which represents 2,000 news and magazine outlets worldwide. And I'm curious to see how she sees it from her perspective. So Danielle, and by the way, we want all of our speakers to keep to 3 minutes each. They'll have a chance to talk more. But in the beginning, for the overview, 3 minutes, because we have a lot of people to get in.
Okay.
Danielle, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you, Richard. Thank you very much for having me. I know you have a great group, so I'm honored to be invited to talk with you. And I've already heard some of the thoughts expressed, and I couldn't agree more, especially the thoughts around the fact that we produce a quality product that people actually trust. We talked about trust and that they enjoy. Our brands are associated with, I represent the news publishers and magazines across the country. And so it's hyper local, mom and pop, all the way up to the biggest. And especially in the communities where they have an intimate relationship, they serve that community, they have engagement, they have, they cover things of public interest, of, things that affect your daily lives. I think that that's integral to what people need and enjoy. I think they depend on that. And then they also rely on the brands. I think that's a big piece that I'm hearing a lot about lately, especially as we transition to the digital marketplace, because that's what follows. That's where people will continue to recognize the reliable brand and the credibility and the integrity, especially as trust becomes a big issue. So, for example, in local communities, when, people trust more, studies have been done and people continue to trust their local coverage, and it speaks to them. I think that that's something that we need to really hold on to. So I think that the product is good, the humans that produce and report on things that are, holding our government officials accountable, watching what's going on in city hall and, the government to make sure that people are doing the right thing. The efficacy that you feel about your community because you have an impact, because you're engaged with somebody who's covering it, all of the positive things that come from local coverage, I think is so important, and that has to continue. So what does the future hold? And I'm looking at the time. So the only thing that I would say, and just to start off the conversation, what I truly believe is that We will continue to survive and thrive because of those brands and because of the quality and the reliance upon what people produce, and that they really truly do enjoy it. We're not making something that people don't want. It's just it has to exist in this new environment, this digital environment. I think that people are being more innovative and experimental than we get credit for. But in this digital marketplace, we don't have a broken product. We have a broken marketplace because, like you said, Richard, if you can't get return, then how do you reinvest? And you have to keep your doors open. I think that nonprofit philanthropic spending and foundations are incredibly helpful and complementary. But if the business model is broken, because in the digital space we have, you only get 30 to 70% of your advertising dollar. We have AI that's now competing with, first it's using our content to train the models, and then it's used in the outputs, it's competing with the same audience to the same market with the same people that we're serving. And there's something very perverse about that. That's something that we're focusing a lot on because that can't continue. This is IP protected content that has to be reimbursed. Otherwise, what are these models going to feed off of in the first place if we go away? And what quality and what does society look like if we go away? And there's nothing left to feed on. One last thing I'd like to say is Dwight talked about his teaching, intellectual curiosity. And that's something that's really important that we hang on to because it's those critical thinking skills. I have 2 teenage daughters. I don't even know if they can spell because of the autocorrect on their phones, and it's kind of like a crutch. And if you don't, you know what I mean? I see some people nodding. If you don't have the human aspect to what we do, technology can't replace us. Humans are essential in critical thinking and the coverage that we do and the trust that we have with readers. Like that can't be replaced. That can't be replaced by technology. We need to partner with these new technologies. They need to respect our IP. And I'll just leave it there because there's so much to talk about, but I really appreciate being invited to this group to have a thoughtful discussion on these important issues. So thank you for having me.
Excellent. Thanks for accepting our invitation. That's good. I do want to hear from Hermione Malone. I hope I pronounced your name correctly, because she deals with the nonprofit world. She's the head of emerging markets for the American Journalism Project, and she oversees the implementation of the Local Philanthropy Partnerships and the establishment and incubation of startup organizations alongside a coalition of community stakeholders, local philanthropies, and management talent. So I'd like to hear your perspective on whether the solution is really nonprofits or.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm really delighted to be here. I just want to take a moment because I'm getting a lot of joy from looking at the assembled group. I can see Dr. Reynolds, who taught me opinion writing when she was visiting as a professor at Florida A&M, and I can see Mary Curtis, who I got to work with years ago at the Charlotte Observer. And Irving Washington, who's on the board of AJP, and Gary Lee, who's in Tulsa, where I'm doing some work right now, is here. So great to be in this crowd of a full circle moment for me. My name is Hermione Malone, and I'll just give a little bit of context about the American Journalism Project to answer the question. We're the first ever venture philanthropy that's dedicated to nonprofit local news. We make grants to nonprofit news organizations. We partner with communities to launch new organizations. And we also coach leaders as they grow and sustain their newsrooms. So since our launch in 2019, we have built a portfolio of 44 organizations, including 4 that are currently being incubated and a local news incubator that I run. In that time, we have committed more than $55 million in grants to local newsrooms, and we've helped raise an additional $168 million from other philanthropic partners for local nonprofit news. Our hope is really to catalyze a movement to raise more national dollars, cultivate local champions in markets, and attract outstanding talent and advocate for local news as a public good. So with that being said, it's pretty clear that we're bullish on the nonprofit model as a pathway to closing news and information gaps. We also have good reason to believe that the nonprofit news field is a source for broader optimism. So the Institute for Nonprofit News has seen a wave of new nonprofit news organizations pop up across the country. Back in 2010, there were less than 50 nonprofit news organizations in their network. Today, there are more than 440 nonprofit news organizations in INN's network. Our optimism at AJP is also underscored by the rise in funding we're seeing for nonprofit news, both in terms of existing funders who are increasing their commitments and new funders who have never before funded journalism who are joining the fold. I think it's important to note two things here. One, nonprofit incorporation is a tax designation, not a business model. The money doesn't simply magically appear because an organization incorporates as a nonprofit. So having a strong business model with diversified revenue sources and a product that's really meeting the complex needs of communities in ways that are accessible is critical to this success. These are, after all, businesses. So as much as they need strong editorial leadership, they also need strong business operations leadership. And that's actually one of the areas that AJP in particular points its dollars. And then the second point is that there are no silver bullets. While we're putting all of our chips in on nonprofit local newsrooms, the truth is there is no one way that works. The success of the sector is going to take all innovative ideas and models working together. Just as I think much has been made of the fact that the $500 million press forward commitment won't be enough to save local news, it's similarly true that one model won't be enough. And I know, Richard, you wanted, some thoughts on surviving versus thriving. I just encourage journalists across the country when I'm talking to them to take care of themselves. So many of us experience burnout at legacy media, but that is not something that can't show up in the nonprofit sector as well. I think so many of the newer nonprofit media leaders have committed to leaving behind a lot of that toxicity and some of those draining practices. And so although this work is important, urgent even, so is the well-being of the teams that provide news coverage to us. So I have noticed that a lot of the more resilient nonprofit leaders in our network have found community among themselves that provides a source of support and joy and helps them keep perspective on this work. And I will just close with the notion that in some respects, I think that is an additional advantage that many leaders of nonprofit news organizations find, that they are mission driven. And the mission of their organizations, whether it's driven by uncovered beats or undercovered beats, or fuller, more complete storytelling of historically marginalized communities, that mission helps elevate the meaning of the work for so many and allow them to not only survive, but to thrive, even amid a lot of the chaos that we see in the industry.
You're here. Okay. I want to take a moment. I see a special guest I wanted to introduce everybody to and have her introduce herself to us. That's Aparna Mukherjee. I've got to learn how to pronounce that. She is the new executive director of the Society of Environmental Journalists. And that means that the reporting about climate change and all the other environmental issues that we see will somehow all get funneled through the Society for Environmental Journalists for elucidation to the public and to the rest of us journalists. So welcome, and in fact, let's have a toast to your success. Hear, hear.
Thanks.
All right. All right. What do you want to tell?
Oh, I couldn't hear the last thing you said.
Oh, I'm sorry. What would you like to tell us about how what your priorities are and how the rest of us can fit into that?
Yeah, well, I think what we're talking about, Aparna Mukherjee, recently of Resolve Philly, which is a solutions newsroom, a lot of you might know, as coming from running a hyperlocal newsroom that really focuses on community engaged reporting and really speaking to, but also amplifying communities that have been the least served by legacy media. And I say that as someone who got my start in Philadelphia at the Inquirer, has worked at the New York Times, Bloomberg, these different places. The idea of the sustainable business model, I think, is less clear to me than the trust that we're talking about. And that's why I dropped that comment in the chat of communities that have not been served or even have been harmed by legacy media, and how we look at that through the lens of climate reporting and environmental journalism. If we're talking about environmental justice census tracts, if we're thinking about what the effects of redlining are when it comes to environmental impacts and what the repercussions are, these are stories that are not being adequately covered. But at the end of the day, the information gaps in terms of what do communities need to better advocate for themselves, this is where the gaps are being filled by environmental journalists, and it is getting increasingly dangerous to have these conversations. We're planning for SEJ's conference the first week of April in Philadelphia, hosted at Penn by Kathleen Hall Jameson and Michael Mann, who just won that case, that 12 years in the making, being libeled and being compared to a child molester because of his climate data piece. We're talking about what security looks like, because
Wait a
environmental.
minute, I don't know about that one. If you have something and you can drop in the chat about that, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, he just won a $1 million libel case about this. And,
Wow.
and SEJ's conference is being hosted there because Kathleen and Michael have started a new center around climate sustainability and communications. And this is where we're going to figure out, as a conversation convening point, what we need to do to better serve underserved communities, but also what it means to be an environmental journalist in this time where just reporting data points is going to get us there. So I'm incredibly excited about this. And I think, given I started as an environmental journalist, coming back to it, this feels like the most urgent question of our times. And if we don't engage, especially the youngest generations, in these conversations, we cannot battle the disinformation that feels like that is really one of the biggest threats to democracy building. And the civic engagement that used to come along with news literacy is something that we really need to address. And, I see Kim, for example, from Report for America, which is one of our major program partners, when we're talking about how to make sure that, again, widening the aperture, figuring out who gets to practice environmental journalism is really my biggest goal. And thinking internationally, we're mostly in North America. So
Right.
Thank you. Thank you for the welcome and inviting me.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Now I see Tracy Powell has her hand up, and I was about to call on Tracy anyway, because she comes at all this from the perspective of the BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, people of color, and how the money that is being distributed goes, where it goes, and how much of it goes to the people who he says really need it. So you have the floor for 3 minutes, Tracy.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you for having me here. Like Hermione, I am just honored to be in the same space with so many people I admire and respect. Roger Witherspoon, Lynn, Adrian, I saw you there, Aparna, Karen Dunlap, Stephen Biene, so many faces on here, familiar faces. So just really, really happy, Kevin Irving. So I founded the Pivot Fund 2 years ago this month. It was initially founded in response to a gap that I continued to see in the ecosystem after I left the Racial Equity and Journalism Fund, which was the first fund that I founded. When I was at Reg, for short, we saw that money needed to be channeled to these hyperlocal news outlets run by and serving communities of color. And so we did that. But what we learned is that money alone will not solve this problem. And so I realized very quickly, because the dollars went out right before the pandemic broke out, and soon after George Floyd's murder, I realized that these dollars needed to be accompanied by capacity building services, coaching, mentoring, but also technology and legal support. And so I ramped up very, very quickly trying to raise funds. I raised over in excess of $10 million in short order to channel to these organizations. In May of 2021, I stepped down, thought I was going to rest a little bit, and was at Harvard Shorenstein Center, where I delved into a major research project. Seeing that now we had some dollars in the space, I wanted to assess what the impact was of these dollars. And that's how Pivot Fund was born. And so one of the things that Pivot Fund does differently from other funders is that we start with community members. We start by asking them questions about who they trust for news and information. Where do they turn to in times of crisis, such as a pandemic? How do they access the information, and then what do they do with it once they have it? Once those community members point us in the direction of the trusted sources in their community, we go about the business of vetting those organizations and really understanding whether they are truly meeting information needs. We want to understand how they are structured. We want to look under their hood, but most importantly, we want to understand exactly why they are the trusted source, and then whether this might be part of a solution in that community to solve or help solve the information gaps. And so that's how we initially approach it with this. We call it a landscape analysis. Once we understand that this is not a pink slime site, or it's not a viable product that perhaps for full investment, we then go about the business again of looking under the hood and decide whether we want to invest. We provide transformational dollars to these news outlets. What do I mean by transformational? I mean that we give them enough money to hire at least one new person to their staff. And so most of the times they hire more than one new person, but they should be able to hire at least one new person. They should also be able to pay themselves. Why do we invest in grassroots organizations? Because they are the ones closest to the community. They are embedded in their communities. They are the folks that their community members see at parent-teacher conferences. They are the people that run into their readers in the grocery store. As a former circulation manager, I understand the power of that. When you know the person who's producing your news and information, you feel comfortable sharing information with them, and you feel comfortable co-creating stories with them, reporting with them. But most importantly, you're more apt to trust them. You trust people that you know or feel that you know. And so that's what we're really tapping into. That's what we're leveraging. These organizations, I want to make sure that I disavow folks of a kind of a, when I say grassroots, I don't mean tiny news organizations. I want to give one example. Here in Atlanta, where I live, there's a hyperlocal community news site that's on Instagram. It's called ATL Scoop, and you can look it up if you want to. ATL Scoop co-creates news and information along with its community members. They have nearly 1 million followers on Instagram. Let me repeat, nearly 1 million followers. Compare that to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, which is the flagship newspaper for the state of Georgia, with 120,000 subscribers between both print and digital. Wow. So the Pivot Fund looks at something like that and sees potential, maybe not for direct funding support, but a definite collaboration with an organization like the AJC. And interestingly enough, I know now the AJC is sharing its content with ATL Scoop. And so these are the organizations that they are where their communities are. That is just that simple. They meet folks where they are, and they leverage digital technology to reach those communities and serve those communities with critical news and information. I'm probably up on my 3 minutes, so I'll stop there, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay, I may have missed this, but what do you advise the average journalist sitting in the newsroom, afraid that he or she is going to get laid off? What do you advise that person to do?
So this is similar to a question I was recently asked. And I think that there is a disconnect between communities and journalism and journalists. And so if we want to remain relevant, if we want to survive and indeed thrive, we have to shorten that distance with the communities that we're supposed to be serving. We have to get closer to that community and understand what they are interested in, what they want to know, what they need to know. I had a webinar earlier today, and we talked about ways that you can do that, really innovative and creative ways to do that. When you go directly to ask your community members what's on their mind, the first thing they want when they first
Wait,
woke
wait,
up.
let me just ask this, Tracy.
Mm-hmm.
How does that help you keep your job if there's no ads coming in?
I think that the organizations that Pivot supports, they're generating revenue. Now, it doesn't take millions and millions of dollars to support their organizations, but they're making enough that, you know, they're generating revenue and they're supporting themselves and maybe a small staff. The organizations we support, 5 and fewer reporters. So, you know, some of the reporters that you're talking about, Richard, perhaps they should go talk to some of the newsrooms we support.
Okay. All right, I'm going to ask Eric Ortiz to what his thoughts are about this. Because, Eric, what was that piece you wrote? 5 ways newspapers can make money. I don't know if everybody's read it, but what are your thoughts on that question? You're sitting there in the newsroom. What do you do?
Well, first of all,
You're scared to death that they're going to lay you off next.
thank you, Richard, for inviting me and for bringing us all together. I think that's where the future of news starts, is bringing people together. What Tracy was talking about, building community, going to the community, listening to the community. That's where innovation starts, because I think it also starts with looking back and doing great journalism, rebuilding the trust that was mentioned before. I think that trust has been lost. One reason why I think we've gotten away in some instances from doing great journalism and not giving the people what they want, so they stop subscribing, or, you know, this is one reason. You know, so if we go to the community, listen to the community, get to know the community. This is something that I've been doing. I started a nonprofit a few years ago called Strong Mind, Strong Body Foundation, and I live in Minneapolis. And after the pandemic, coming out of the pandemic, then 3 months after the pandemic, in March 2020, we had George Floyd, and that happened. And that was a terrible thing, and it really impacted this city more than any other city. You know, it impacted the whole world. But here in my backyard, you know, we were, you know, there's a lot of chaos and a lot of problems. So I jumped in. You know, we moved here from Los Angeles into July 2019. Minneapolis on top 10 list of all the great cities to live, and then, you know, it soon became, you know, a very challenging city to live in. And so there were a lot of problems, a lot of polarization. Everything that's happening across the country is a microcosm here. And so how could I be part of the solutions? That's what I asked myself. And that's kind of dove in, joined the neighborhood association board, became president, and started helping the community solve these problems. You know, acting like a journalist, there had a lot of questions. There was a lot of public safety issues, there still are. And how can I help them solve these? So, you know, we connected with the community. I approached it like as a connector, be a bridge maker, you know, bring people together. There was a lot of differences of opinions, political opinions, ideological opinions, and how can we bring these people together to have civilized discourse, civil discourse? And
Were you acting as a journalist when you were doing all this?
Yeah, a lot of journalism skills were part of that process. So there's a lot in community building. The same skills that apply, I think, apply to journalism, and journalism can be very transformational and create change. And so I think if we go back to that old school way of doing journalism, which is happening in a lot of great places, there's a lot of great journalism happening, but I think it can happen more. And I think it starts with community engagement and really engaging the community, listening to the community, actively listening to the community, and not just, you know, sending out a digital survey, and not just calling them on the phone, not just doing a video call, but going out in the community physically, you know, shaking hands, looking people in the eye, and rebuilding that trust, helping people get to know you. So that's what I've been doing a lot of. We started a program called Community Solutions with Youth, with our nonprofit, and it's all about solving problems, rethinking how we solve problems. It brings young people together with community elders, community leaders, community stakeholders, bring them all together, and then the youth identify an issue with support from the community, a very diverse cross-section of the community. Everyone is welcome to be part of this community solutions team, and then we help support them. So the issues they've raised.
Eric, how does this help the bottom line and keep newspapers and television stations going?
Well, I think first it's reaching a younger audience. So reaching this younger audience, this demographic, that is not interested in news all that much. This is how you get them interested in news. First, you get them interested, you teach them and guide them how to solve problems and how to use their voice to advocate for change. So we're creating a journalism program in a middle school here in Minneapolis, Ella Baker Middle School, and with 6th to 8th grade students. Ella Baker News, we're starting as an after-school program in a few weeks, and we're going to teach them journalism, student-led newsroom with 6th to 8th graders who are part of this community solutions team. We're going to see if we can partner. We have some local media partners to amplify the voices. They're going to give them micro internships so they can make money that way. And then we're going to look to see if we can get it funded, in a few different ways. Philanthropy is one, but that's not the only one. We're also going to talk to local businesses, get sponsors. Can Target, which is based here, headquarters in Minneapolis, big corporation, would they fund something like this? Costco, businesses that are making money, that have money. I think that's another way you fund it. And then also talk to the citizens here. If they want to, you're going to have to support journalism if you want a society that functions well. Because right now we have in our neighborhood, people getting carjacked, every other day there's a carjacking, people are scared and terrorized.
Eric, I think Richard, you and I are talking about something different than what Richard is talking about. Richard is asking us how to save newspapers and TV stations. Eric, I don't think that you and I are concerned about saving newspapers and TV stations.
No, I am concerned about that.
I think what we're in the business of doing is trying to save news. And so that's very different.
Yeah.
That's very different from trying to save a newspaper or a TV station. And I talk all the time about, that's not why I do what I'm doing right now. I think for some newspapers, it may be too late. They can try to rebuild trust. They can certainly try to get closer to the community. I don't discourage that at all. But some of, Danielle was talking earlier about some of these brands. Some of these brands don't have any value. At least in the community, they don't have the brand value in the community is crap because so much harm has been created in the community by that newspaper brand. And so a lot of the pieces of old line journalism, old line newspapers that have produced harms in the community, I'm not missing that at all. That can die. That can go by the wayside. There are some parts of the newspaper business that we need to hold dear and hold close. That's fact checking, that's credible quality news and information, that's acknowledging when we make a mistake, we do it and apologize and try to do better next. But some of the ways that newspapers have treated communities and mistreated communities, how they mistreated some of their own employees, how they didn't reflect their communities, how they intentionally chased behind affluent white residents and outright ignored and harmed Black and brown communities, all that can go by the wayside. That stuff I'm not missing at all. And so that can die. But I think what the conversation that Eric and I are having is very different from the question that Richard asked.
But I
just
think
to clarify, I'm
that
not talking about the news organization, saving the news organizations. I'm talking about saving employment for the journalists, whether it's at a news organization or not. A focus is on the journalists, not on the organizations.
Can
well,
I?
to that question, I think
Yeah.
what journalists have to do is build their brand. You have to approach it. You have to build a brand, whether you're in a job, because that job could go tomorrow. That's what's happening. There's no stability right now in legacy media. There's not a lot of stability. And the people who are running a lot of these places, they don't have a lot of solutions, I don't think. So, you know, I think innovation is part, but you have to take control of the destiny. So, you know, start your own newsletter, start your own podcast. You know, you have the skills, you have to build the brand, you know, get on LinkedIn if you're not there and start networking. You know, you have to build that even if you're wherever you are. So that's something that I've been starting doing a lot more the last couple months, something that kind of I got away from, you know, because over the last couple of years, but really, you know, just started doing that and just, you know, you're your best advocate, you're the best, you know, you can figure out how to make money. There are lots of ways to make money, I think, in news. It's just, we have to be a little more creative. The old ways of making money with news aren't going to necessarily work in the future. You know, the advertising model that worked in the past is not going to work in the future. But I think, you know, if you can provide valuable information, people will value that and pay for that. You know, it starts with the information. You know, ask the people what do they want and then give them what they want and they will pay for that. And that's kind of how I think we have to approach it. Give them what they want, because I don't think journalism as an industry has been giving the audience what they want. The customer has not been getting what they want, and so that's why they're going away from, you know, all this loss of trust and all of this kind of stuff.
Born to former slave George and Rebecca Latimer.
All right, Elodie, Mailliet-Storm. I want to make sure I'm pronouncing that correctly. So correct me if I'm wrong here.
You are, Richard. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
He's the CEO of CatchLight, which is in that nonprofit world as well. So let's hear what her perspective is.
Yes, and I think I understand your question a lot better now as well, in terms of focusing on the individual journalist. So what CatchLight is, just quickly so that I can introduce myself, we are a visual media organization. Our aim is really to try and answer to this paradox, which is most people are consuming information today visually. Images have become absolutely the cornerstone of our communication. Yet media organizations have, you know, either completely de-invested or not invested much in visual journalism. So between 2009 and 2019, we have lost more than 52% of staff visual journalists in newsrooms across the United States. That's more than any other part of newsrooms. And so what we're trying to do today is really help local news organizations be able to tell stories visually. So we're building a collaborative model, which is a shared visual desk where local news organizations can access editors and social media producers, think through community engagement. How do you use images to actually produce exhibitions or set up portrait studios at markets to really deeply engage audiences where they are. So that's a lot of the work that we're doing at CatchLight. We're currently serving 10 newsrooms, mostly in California, and we're about to expand nationally to at least 30 newsrooms by 2027. So that's where we are in terms of, you know, the individual journalist and that perspective. What I wanted to bring to this group as well is that, you know, the fact that actually visual journalists have had to make this transition, because as I described, a lot of them have lost their staff jobs, unfortunately, very early as part of the challenges that media organizations have been facing. And so a couple of years ago, we commissioned this report, which I would like to share, on the state of photography in 2022 with Dr. Tara Pixley, who is based in Los Angeles. And we surveyed a really significant number of photographers. And what we found is that actually today, most of them are not sustaining themselves through necessarily visual journalism as a day-to-day occupation, but they are sustaining themselves through a lot of other activities, like teaching, you know, film production, nonprofit work. I'll put the link in the chat. So we have seen this transition from the individual perspective on the visual journalism side very early on. What we are working on with a lot of the visual journalists that we are placing on staff in newsrooms today, and some of them actually with our partner Reports for America, who is also here, is this very question of how do you build audience so then that audience can turn into some form of monetization opportunities. So whether it is more audience for the newsroom and hence more membership, whether it's, you know, them building their audience directly onto their TikTok channels, which a lot of, you know, some of them are starting to do as well, so that then they can support themselves with other freelance work or teaching opportunities as well. So I think looking at all of those mechanisms is really, really important from our perspective.
Okay, thank you, thank you. Kim, you're nodding your head.
I want to talk, Richard. I want to talk.
Well, it's your turn now. Let's go.
Thank you so much. I am so honored to be here. I have loved the conversation up to now. Let me tell you a little bit about Report for America. But first, I want to say thank you, Vincent McCraw, my colleague at Report for America, for being here too. Vincent is our ambassador to the Midwest, working with all of our newsrooms and core members in that area. So thank you so much for being here, Vincent, and I hope you join in too. Report for America is a nonprofit journalism organization. We've been around for 6 years, and in that time, we've worked with almost 350 newsrooms from around the country in every state by helping them become more sustainable as businesses, teaching them tools. How do you raise money? How do you go after grants? And also, importantly, by recruiting more than 600 journalists, many of them early career journalists, 46% of them journalists of color, to work in their newsrooms, to tell stories that newsroom hasn't been able to tell because of a lack of staff and desire sometimes previously. And we have paid for part of their salaries for up to 3 years. So we have helped local newsrooms raise around $30 million from local donors. And then we've injected more than $20,000 in the form of, I'm sorry, $20 million in the form of direct salary support. Local journalism is definitely at a crossroads now. I don't think we will see the demise of local journalism. Too many organizations, too many states are waking up to the idea, and we're starting to see the data of what happens when local news goes away, right? Voting participation goes down. Nobody knows who their neighbor is. Disinformation, misinformation, corruption increases. So I think more organizations than ever are waking up that, oh my gosh, we can't let this go away. We are one of the rare nonprofits, perhaps, that supports both for-profit newsrooms, nonprofit newsrooms, legacy newspapers, and digital newsrooms. In part, what we are trying to do is work with newsrooms that can become kind of beacons for the industry, and we will take the lessons and the good ideas that they have and share that with our pretty extensive network now. There was a great conversation earlier about, what comes first, kind of business sustainability or great journalism. I can't tell you the number of newsrooms that have said, these core members that you have found for us, and that the newsroom ultimately picks themselves, they have transformed the newsroom, and they are the vehicle around which we have been able to raise money like we never have before. Because when people see that they and their communities are being covered, they are willing to support the newsroom, even if it's $5, $10, whatever. It's hugely rewarding. And the kinds of stories that they're able to tell is just amazing. I mean, at my staff meeting every week, every Monday, we end the meeting with our regional managers. Vincent is one, telling one great story from their region every week that their core members have produced. And it's just, your eyes go misty before you you get off the call and start the week. It's just great. So that is basically what I want to say. Tracy, you have a question?
Go, Tracy.
Yes, Kim, I have a question for you, actually. Pivot Fund also provides funding to both for-profit and nonprofit organizations, but we focus on independently owned for-profit organizations, community-based and serving organizations. Do you think there is an issue with nonprofit dollars going to corporate news organizations, specifically those that are owned by hedge funds?
So here's what I will say to that. We started at Report for America working with what are now hedge fund owned organizations because we considered ourselves as supporting communities, and sometimes those newsrooms owned by those organizations, those companies, were the only game in town. We have seen so much need over the years by independent, for-profit, certainly nonprofit organizations, that we have some newsrooms that are owned by hedge funds, but we are phasing those out. And so we will not be doing that moving forward. Yeah.
You're turning down the Tribune Company newspapers, for example?
We don't have any from the Tribune Company. We have we don't have any more from McClatchy. We have some from Gannett, but again, that is that's not going to be any longer.
Wow, I think it's important. I think it's important to mention that, the reporters that you had in McClatchy were kicked out after Report for America. One of the leadership team said something that McClatchy didn't like, and particular that newspaper in Columbus, Georgia, in the state where I sit. And so I think that I wonder how much of that has to do with your decision to no longer work with those kinds of newspapers.
When did that happen, Tracy?
Kim, when did that happen?
It was a few years ago. Our founder said that, look, a hedge fund owned newsroom is not necessarily the best business model for local news. And shortly after that time, McClatchy then said, we are not going to apply anymore to Report for America. The folks who are already in Report for America working for those newsrooms could continue their second year. Vincent, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think any second year reporter became a third year reporter in those newsrooms.
That's correct.
Yeah. And that was that.
Wow. Okay. Miranda has her hand up.
I'm wondering, Kim, if you have any data on what happens to the Report for America reporters after they do their stint with you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. We consider ourselves kind of in the business of maintaining and growing the journalistic sustainability, the journalistic pipeline. And we take a pulse every year of our alumni. 82% of Report for America alumni core members are still in journalism, which is really, really great. We're really proud of that number. What we try to do when they're in our program, we offer more than 70 trainings and workshops and, a leadership workshop for our core members, so that, and it's a certificate program, the leadership workshop, so that when they go, we have turned them from good local reporters to great local reporters. And, you know, we're sometimes a victim of our own success when like other newsrooms want to pluck our core members from our local newsrooms, you know, to their bigger newsrooms. I also want to say that we require every core member to do a community service project involving youth media. So they're often in middle schools or high schools, a couple hours a week, you know, helping the local newspapers or the school newspaper staff write headlines better or whatever it happens to be. And we're hoping that, you know, we're not around long enough to know that like, oh, you know, a core member sparked my interest in journalism, but it's a way that hopefully they're seeding a next generation in journalism by their service projects. And the newsrooms love that because they look so great that there are these young people in the community helping out in ways that don't involve, you know, writing a story. So anyway, that has been a really popular part of our program too, the community service projects. So two hands. Dr. Reynolds? You're on mute.
Interesting, as always. But my concern is, are we preparing our students and newsrooms for the issues coming from AI, fake news, deep fakes? Two just quick examples. Not long ago, 40 million likes touched Taylor Swift, whose body was pornographically constructed and her head was on it as deep fake. And she had enough followers to scream back at X to tear it down. And that was great big news. But in reporting that I'm seeing, so many women now are being treated pornographically because of deep fakes. It's so easy to take one's face and slap it on a pornographic body, but they don't have the understanding of how to deal with it. Someone can say, well, if you don't do what I tell you, I'm going to have your body at your workplace and in a pornographic way. And that's very disturbing to me. And, you know, like facial recognition, where a couple women in Detroit were arrested because of these systems that are in our community more than any other communities that labeled them as thieves and robbers. So I'm just saying, are we ready for today? Because this is not just tomorrow. What AI is doing, we know we're going to see it all over the place on this 2024 election. So are we there yet? Are we going to get there yet? And who's getting us there?
That's a great question. I mean, we have multiple trainings on how to protect yourself, how to be safe as a reporter, including how not to get doxxed. We have not taught yet, you know, our editors or whatever, you know, how to identify deep fakes. But we're putting together a program. You know, we surveyed our newsrooms to find out what are you doing with AI. About a quarter of our newsrooms are kind of taking baby steps, translation, you know, possibly some are scraping public agendas, but we're putting together a program which will include networking among our newsrooms. Like, what are you doing that works? What do you have to be careful of? You know, what have you found with AI that you want to share with the others? So putting that together right now.
Yeah, I would like to see AI reporters. That's just what we do, just like environmental reporters. You know, we're on the way to the moon. You know, we need to be able to launch our minds and ideals out there. Because when I do cover some of these forums, I don't see people of color there reporting, and I need to hope that we are preparing our students and young people, because they're smart, they're industrious, but I like to see them writing stories. And if they're in that Are there schools that you know that are teaching these skills to young people, or are there places they can go and you know, have their stories printed?
So are you talking about kind of journalism programs
Yes,
teaching
yes.
young reporters? Yeah, I think they're starting to, absolutely.
Okay, I hope so.
Okay. Could you just explain? I just learned about this term being doxxed a few days ago. Could you explain, if there's anybody else out there who doesn't know what that's about, what that is?
Doxing involves kind of getting your personal information and splaying it all over the internet. Your phone number, you know, whatever private information you can find, your home address, so that others can harass you.
And that's happening to journalists as well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. No, okay.
Yeah.
I didn't hear you. What was it? Big dot, you said?
Doxing.
DOXX.
Right.
Oh,
It's taking
I
all your
see.
information and letting everybody, personal information, spreading it to the world. Okay, Danielle, you have your hand up.
Thank you. I think a lot of this goes back because they're not empowered. So if you're Taylor Swift, to Dr. Reynolds' point, you might have a fan base and you have power, but the common person doesn't. And in that case, you have to have a set of laws that start protecting people. You have to have a set of laws that have name. I mean, that's what we do. We're an advocacy organization. I don't run a publication. I fight for you and journalists in the courts and in Congress. And right now you don't have rights. The common person does not. You can't take down when you're, you know, revenge porn. You can't take down when your face is used in the ways that Dr. Reynolds described. Laws protect people. And right now we don't have any around any of this technology. They're not held liable for anything that they espouse as far as the elections. They can make up lies. They have no liability. There's Section 230. The Supreme Court just fought about it yesterday. Or I'm sorry, on Monday. Yeah, yesterday. And they're not gonna, you know, they're gonna win. You know, the Supreme Court will say they have First Amendment rights, which is an irony because out of the other side of their mouth, they're gonna say they have immunity because they didn't create the content. And it's gonna get worse with AI because there's no liability. Journalists also don't have rights to payment. I mean, we need to remember this. I don't care who you work for. They don't have a right to be paid for their stuff like everybody else does, like music, movies. That's a problem. And if we don't get some sort of laws to start protecting the journalists, who cares who they work for, then that's going to be a problem. Nobody's going to survive. And if we don't wake up to the fact that music, movies, television, everybody else gets paid for what they put out there that has an economic value, and we do not, and if we don't start uniting and coming together to start saying it's our time to be empowered and get paid by laws and get protected through responsibility that these technologies need to carry in social media and the garbage that they put out there that we take responsibility for. These are about journalists. Journalism is about journalists. And right now they have very little protections. And don't get me started on Ukraine and Gaza and what's happening to them over there. They're not protected, and we need to start fighting for journalists because that's the core of our industry. Thank you.
Okay. Do you have something you can put in the chat about what the organization is doing to protect journalists? How we can get involved in that if we want to?
Absolutely. We all need to start fighting for what really matters here. I would love to do that, Richard. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, Rebecca and then Kim again.
Yes, thank you very much for this conversation. Danielle, I totally agree with you. The other day I read a story in the Economist.com.
Economist.
Yeah, the title is The Rise of the TikTok News Anchor. There's a guy there, News Daddy. He's got like 10 million followers. And all he does is basically rip off reporters and say, here's a story. And I mean, he gets a lot of, you know, he's got a lot of followers. He gets creators money on TikTok. I think we also need protection for our work for plagiarism, theft. You know, just like in a sense, Taylor Swift. She said, TikTok, I don't want to see any of my music there, and she doesn't have it. And as Danielle is right, we need to start figuring out a way to protect our work. And while I appreciate that News Daddy, in fact, I've messaged him, hey, at least give credit where credit is due. Is it CNN? Is it the Toledo Blade? What is it? Because these people like News Daddy, if you go to him on TikTok, All he's done is regurgitating everybody's news stories from the Washington Post to the little Fresno newspaper. He finds it. But wouldn't it be nice if the money he makes, I mean, I figure if he gets paid, we should get paid. So I think Danielle is right. We need to protect our work. We need to speak up. We need to find lawyers. Yeah, that's the next part. And I wanted to ask Tracy real quick. You said something about Atlanta Scoop, and I just looked them up.
ATL Scoop.
Yeah, okay, ATL Scoop. I apologize for not having the correct name, but are they monetizing on anything? What they put on there, I just looked at some of their stuff. Is that original stuff of theirs, or are they getting it from other places and then, you know, putting it out there? I just wondered.
Yeah, I think they do both. ATL Scoop does monetize. They sell ads. They have sponsored posts on their stream. They do original reporting, but they also aggregate. Some of the original stories that we have seen from them is they covered Stacey Abrams' run for governor. We had a Black state legislator here who switched from Democrat to Republican. They covered that. But here's the value in some of what they do. When our Institute of Atlanta closed down unexpectedly, all of a sudden, I think the same thing happened in Chicago. ATL Scoop was the first to post that on their site. I had to wait for the next day to read about it in the AJC, but I saw it in real time on ATL Scoop. And the value was the folks in their comment section. There were students who had just paid their tuition the day before who were coming to ATL Scoop and saying, will I get my money back? Will this go on my student loan? Will I have to pay this money back when I can't even get into class? And so they were they were co-reporting this story along. ATL Scoop made the original post. Then you had commenters in there adding to the story, building it out. Hey guys, I went to my so-and-so counselor over at such and such office, and this is what they had me do. This is the paperwork they had me fill out. You need to go talk to so-and-so. So it was real information building upon the original post. And because those commenters were in there, adding to the story, that was the real value. The story, the post then became a utility. It was useful. It was more useful. And if I were at the AJC and I'm an editor there, I would have been monitoring that. And the story that the AJC came out with the next day wasn't as comprehensive or complete because they didn't have all of these voices contributing to that story, reporting these citizens reporting on their own behalf, advocating on behalf of other students and so forth. It happened again this past holiday when there was a customer at a McDonald's who was shot and killed. ATL, this is how I know somebody over there is in journalism. ATL Scoop did not post the video of the woman getting shot. It was posted elsewhere on the web, but ATL Scoop did not. So there's some kind of journalistic standard happening there somewhere. But they posted the story about this shooting, and then there were folks in the comments who were inside the McDonald's when it happened, talking about what really went down. The original reports that I saw on television and in the AJC said it was an altercation between the woman who was killed and some other group of girls. That was not accurate, right? The AJC story might have been factual, but it was not accurate in that it wasn't a dispute between those two people. She was an innocent bystander trying to diffuse the situation and wound up getting killed. Not only did you have friends of the shooter commenting in there saying, well, if this woman wouldn't have gotten killed if she hadn't stuck her nose in other folks' business, blah, blah, blah. But you had folks who actually had the footage of what happened in there commenting. And again, the ATL Scoop did not post it. Yes, they make money. I won't say that they made money off of that particular story, but because they have more than or nearly 1 million followers. Yeah, they're getting advertising.
Okay, Kim, and then Dwight Ellis had his hand up.
Thank you so much. So Richard, I didn't answer your questions. I just want to go on the record as doing that before we hang. So I would just say, for those folks who have a job in journalism, hang in there. They are doing critical work. And local journalism is not dead. We're just all in this process of figuring out, what's going to work here, what works here, what business model is right for, this particular kind of publication. But I would also say, maybe if you have been laid off or you're looking for another position, to really consider newsrooms that maybe you wouldn't have before and maybe are out of your comfort zone, because with so many news holes around the country, if you're a decent journalist, you're going to find great stories no matter where you go. And I just think that's really important. I think many of us have come from that kind of tradition. We've come from a place where you could see a trajectory, but know the richness of the news in places where maybe you started out previously. So just definitely keep that in mind. I think journalism needs to solve the problem of low salaries. We want people to stay in journalism so they can support families on a journalist salary. We all have to work on that. And I think that's part of getting the business model sustainable, right? So that they can pay more. But anyway, local journalism isn't going to go away. We're just in the process of seeing it morph.
Okay, Dwight Ellis.
Thank you. I think a lot of people have mentioned or alluded to the challenge that we have. I can tell you that as a professor in an HBCU, we have a real problem because we have about 400 majors at Bowie State University.
They all want to be entertainment reporters.
No, wait a minute. No. I'm going to a different place. They don't watch traditional television. They don't watch the news. They get their news from TikTok and other platforms like that. They're looking at careers as podcasters,
influencers,
and digital nomads. And I think newspapers, if you want an idea of building a revenue or protecting your job at your news places. I remember when once again when I was working at the NAB, and the National Urban League used to have a program where they would send corporate execs to HBCUs to talk about careers in journalism and communications and other places. We need a Peace Corps for journalism. Maybe if your companies, if some of your newspaper companies, if maybe some of your companies, newspaper companies, would think about adopting HBCUs, nearly 100 of them, and begin to change their attitudes about the value of the platforms of traditional newspapers that are digital now anyway, because they don't know you. They don't know careers. I have a lot of very smart students, but there's more than enough money out there. We have more jobs and more internships we can fill, because they're not interested in working in what we call traditional newspapers, even television. So we have to sell that idea to them. So maybe newspapers need to develop cadres to go out and proselytize the business to some of these colleges and universities, and make these students want to be a part of the journalism teams, the greatness of journalism, which is being lost and replaced by entertainment. They want to be entertained. If you want to go to where they are, they want to be entertained.
Dwight, why should young people go work in newsrooms when they haven't changed culturally, when they are not treated well, when they're not promoted, when they're not allowed to cover the kinds of stories that they want to cover and serve the communities that they want to serve? Why would a young person want to go into that kind of an environment? They want to go into a newsroom when they see how many layoffs are happening.
Oh, no. Well, look, we're talking about Generation Z. This generation, they don't know our business. They don't know our profession. They know entertainment.
I think there are
some of the
folks
news
on
has to be
ATL
entertaining.
Scoop that know
part of getting your point across.
Right.
Hermione has her hand raised, so let me see what, that's all. Yes.
I just wanted to add a note to Kim's point earlier about the availability of positions in newsrooms that might not be on that trajectory that a lot of us who worked in journalism for a long time had in mind. If I look at AJP's site tonight, part of what we do is we will list open opportunities at our portfolio organizations, and there are over 30 posted right now, and they range everything from, you know, fellowships and internships to national editor roles to reporters covering specific beats. They're remote, they're in California, they're in New York, they're in Wisconsin. And I think that we've heard repeatedly from the leadership of a lot of the nonprofit newsrooms that we support how challenging finding talent is. So it's also this interesting phenomenon where you have news organizations begging for top tier talent, and these are newsrooms that pay, you know, competitive salaries, and they realize that those salaries have to be competitive to draw the talent that they need. But one CEO just told me a couple of weeks ago, she's in a top 15 MSA in a majority Black city, and she's like, I cannot find a Black male reporter to save my life.
Mm-hmm.
Would happily hire one, right? And so I think that there is a bit of a disconnect between some of the opportunity that is coming from these more emerging, potentially nonprofit newsrooms, but also that there is opportunity that would take people outside of where they might, you know, naturally choose to pick as the next place on their career ladder. And I know that gets harder as we get older. We've got houses and kids and things, and it's not so easy to pick up and move. But I don't want to lose sight of the fact that we do have some incredible news organizations that are looking for talent, that are growing, and that are not paying wages that wouldn't allow you to have a life.
All right, here. We have, let's see, we had a question here from Isaiah Poole. Well, actually, Isaiah, you can read it yourself. So much for tonight's conversation.
Well, yeah. So the point is that, you know, we have been spending a lot of time talking about how to create sustainable journalism in a very hostile economic environment. And I'm wondering, what can we do to actually change that environment, even as we're working to find new strategies to survive in the meantime? And the example I lifted up is well, we just had a major news organization called The Messenger collapse in, you know, major fashion. Part of their business model was to use social media to push their content, and the algorithms changed on them, and that model failed. So that's, you know, every time, you know, a lot of times we are news organizations swerve in one direction to deal with a problem created by social media, and then social media changes again, and then they're scrambling again. So what do we do?
Yeah.
To that point, you know, it wasn't just the algorithm changed on them, but they weren't creating original content. They weren't doing a lot of original reporting. So all the people who work there, they don't have clips now that they can share. That's a problem. You know, a lot of that money, and this is another problem, I think, there's a lot of money that gets invested, you know, 50 million got invested in the Messenger, and it wasn't well invested. That could have funded a lot of local newsrooms who are doing great work. You know, so the money has to go to the right places, is one thing. And I think, you know, you have to do original work. It starts with great journalism, like Richard Prince does. You know, every week he's been doing this, you know, for a long time and bringing this together. But, you know, some of the best reporting on the industry, I would say, you know, is done by you, and it's been going on for a long time. And so
give that man a raise.
But that's what it's all about. That's what journalism is about. And I think we can guide the young people and show them and educate, re-educate, not just the young people, but all people, what journalism is, because I think that we got to go back to how important journalism is. You know, it is a necessity for, you know, a functioning society. And right now it's in a state of disarray, but I think when there are challenges, there are opportunities. So I think there's great opportunity to strengthen journalism. And so I'm
Yeah, and
optimistic.
it's
Danielle
about
Coffey had something to say.
Thanks, and I don't want to get wonky, but this is what I do. I'm glad the messenger was brought up because every new entrant is going to have this problem. It's not unique to any one entity where you don't get a return because of whatever you put out, however good you make it. And I think it's important to make the journalism better, but at the same time, there's litigation that's pending right now because you are not, nobody, no journalist, no matter who you work for, I'm just giving you the facts, gets a return on your investment. You get, like I said, 30 to 70% of every advertising dollar that comes in. Your subscriptions are saturated. Yes, you might be able to get a ton of traffic, but with a broken ad tech ecosystem that's being challenged in Europe, that's being litigated by the Department of Justice here. I mean, these are really going on. They're actually happening right now. They're being litigated because there's real evidence. They survived a motion to dismiss, so it's going forward because it's happening. We don't have a return on our investment because our distribution system is broken, because those who control the distribution of our content and funnel us to our readers who we want to have a relationship with, they keep all the money. They're currently vacuuming up our content, and it's going to get worse with AI. I'm just telling you what's going to happen.
Sure.
They're vacuuming up our content. They're using it to replace us. I talk to journalists all the time. They're afraid about losing their jobs because this technology will replace them because it's regurgitating what they're writing. And that's illegal and it needs to be stopped and it needs to be fought in the courts. Whoever you work for. I mean, this is, these institutions, they are what they are, right? But no one person is going to get paid for their content if there's not a law to protect them. And currently there are no laws that protect you. I'm just giving it to you straight.
Oh, sure.
How about that? Okay, before Nichelle, question from Facebook from Eddie Sargent. In terms of creating community engagement, how important is it for a newspaper to champion an issue or crusade a cause over the course of many months? I guess this goes back to what people were saying about creating ties with the community and getting community respect for your product, for your journalism. But who wants to answer that question about how important is it to champion a cause for many months?
I think it's about advocating and championing your community, not necessarily a cause, but you're an advocate for your community. And that's what I find in the grassroots organizations. They're advocating for their communities. They're not endorsing political figures. They're not, there might be some issues that their communities are most interested in, and they're covering those issues, but they're not lobbying or championing a particular cause. Is the community that they're advocating for.
Okay. All right, Nichelle Smith.
Hello, everybody. My question is part question and part observation. And I'm taking this from having talked to a number of people who run nonprofit newsrooms over the past year or so that I've been on hiatus, we shall say, from the news industry. And it seems that there are two lanes of thought. There's I want to build something, but we don't want to be the traditional newsroom, and we don't want to be anything like the traditional journalists, even to the point of like turning their nose up and sneering at what traditional journalism is, which I take exception to because it took me 30-something years to be called an investigative journalist, and I will embrace that and emblazon that across everything, every business card out there. But it seems that we don't want to be this, but then because we haven't worked in this, whether it's mainstream media or the Black press or wherever, we don't know what it is that we don't want to be. So it becomes putting up a model that is straight up chaos, or then here's the second thing that I've seen. We want to do everything that traditional newsroom in our town has not done and has stopped doing. So we're going to do it over here on the other side of the street. So then with that, you run the risk of basically recreating everything that the mainstream newsroom was that you didn't like, only now you've moved it across the street. So it would seem to me, and I wondered who agreed with this and what comments would be from our panel, that there needs to be a mindset shift and a shift away from fear. You can't create if you're in a state of fear. And a lot of what we've been talking about today has been coming from fear: fear of losing the job, fear of not having, fear of lack of abundance. How do we change mindsets so that what we do create, when we go to create new newsrooms or reinvent the old newsrooms, is a model that is more stable and sustainable, and to Isaac Poole's point, less toxic for everyone involved? Curious to know what you think about that.
Okay, who wants to take that one?
I took the last one.
I think have to lean into the humanity. There's all this technology, all this fear of AI. I believe, you go back to something that AI cannot do. AI cannot talk to human beings. AI cannot go in the community to reiterate what Tracy's talking about, advocate for the community. It cannot, do that. It needs a human to put the prompts in and spit out the information. So journalists have skills that will always be valuable. And I think we just have to figure out in a creative way and innovative way, rethink how we use those skills to really help solve community problems. Because there are a lot of community problems in every community these days. And how can we help solve them? Because that's what people want. People want solutions. People want answers to their questions. That's what journalists can provide.
Yeah,
So I think
and I would
go
also
back to
say,
that.
like, how to get rid of the fear and the toxicity. Recall when you were reporters on the street, like, you go out and you do the story and you interact with the community and you have a great story to tell, and that is just pure joy. And I think focusing on the community and what they need and what you can provide as a journalist is one way to to lift the toxicity. And you're doing a good job. You're doing critical work and you're helping your community. So letting journalists do that, teaching them how to do that, is one antidote, I think.
Nichelle, a couple thoughts on that as well. One is that to the extent that people are coming from news organizations that have in fact created harm, and they themselves are changed as a result of that and might be more inclined to pick up those practices, I do think people have a responsibility to heal themselves. There was a head of a newsroom that I talked to a couple of years ago, and she was sort of saying, there are people who I would love to hire, but the culture we have created is the antithesis of what they're coming from, because we've done the hard work of building a culture that is counter to the traumatic, toxic one a lot of us came in. And so she's like, I can't hire them. I can't have them bringing sort of like that, retained negativity and toxicity into the newsroom. So the first thing I might say is, if somebody is sort of launching a new venture and you want it to be radically different in culture, I mean, that has to start with that leadership team and the intentionality around the culture they're creating. Secondly, I don't think that even if a new news organization crops up and is doing the things that the legacy outlet does or doesn't do as well or did, I don't know that simply by covering those same areas, you are necessarily covering them in the same way. Right. And so I think we've had a lot of people talk about this notion of moving at the speed of trust, the idea of working with community, giving community voice and say and access. That is a completely different way of covering a community than some of us grew up in newsrooms doing. And so I think that you can do the same work a different way, and you're still providing credible news coverage to a community, but you're doing it in a way that builds trust, that allows them to respect you and then collaborate and partner. And then the last thing I want to say is about fear. There is some fear, I think, in launching new things, and there is a scarcity mindset that a lot of news entrepreneurs come to, and they come to it honestly. So yes, there is a ton of money out there, but it is not equally accessible to everyone. And I think a lot of the work that Tracy does is trying to address that and call that out. And so I think to some extent where there is fear, it might be validly placed. If in fact someone is worried about the sustainability of their thing because of historical inequities in funding and support. So some of that is rational, but some of that people also have to sort of individually own and correct.
Okay, I've got a question about this toxicity. How important is diversity? How does diversity come into this? When you have a diverse newsroom and diverse leadership, does it make any difference? I know that we had people from the New York Times here. Ryan particularly talked about how they studied the culture of the newsroom and made some steps to take it, to change it rather. So I just wonder whether, since everyone in this room is an advocate for more diversity, equity, and inclusion, how does that affect the toxicity level in the newsroom, if at all?
I think it's really important. I mean, I mentioned before that 46% of our core members are journalists of color, but bringing them on board to Report for America, and into these newsrooms is definitely not enough. A lot of newsrooms say they want to partner with Report for America because they definitely want to diversify their newsrooms. But often these newsrooms are hiring their first young person in decades, thanks to our help, or maybe among their first Latino or Black journalists. And so we have had to put things in place so that those journalists feel respected and heard and understood, like mandatory DEIB training every year for our newsrooms, like we need to see the orientation plan, the onboarding plan for this reporter, not only within the newsroom, but how are you going to introduce them to the community? So I think it's really, really important that we stay in partnership with those reporters and those newsrooms to make sure that people are feeling included and welcomed, and that they're out in the community, they hear stories, they come up with great pitches and story ideas, and that they become stories.
Now, Prince, let me also just sort of piggyback on what Kim said. I think a lot of what we see at RFA, at least what I see in reviewing and vetting these newsrooms, well, first of all, I think there's been retrenchment in the whole DEI space, even before George Floyd. But, in a lot of, when our newsrooms apply to RFA, we ask them for the diversity, the DEI mission statement. Well, everybody's got one. Doesn't mean anything because they all have one. But it's when, if they make it to a finalist stage and we do vetting interviews with them and we ask particular questions, it's when you really see just how serious the leadership is on that question of DEIB, and what the actual numbers are and what they're doing. To Kim's point, yeah, there are those who've just never done it. They particularly a lot of the rural suburban newsrooms, just not been a part of their DNA. And what we have to do is try to really figure out if they're serious about it. Because we don't want to place journalists of color, Black journalists, Latino, Native Americans in a newsroom where they're the sole one and there's no support from the newsroom or from the community in which they may be working in, going out and trying to not only do their job, but also to live and be a part of.
I have I'll flip this on y'all. So the news organizations I work with, I used to say all the time, I don't have to talk to them about diversity because they live it, they know it, they breathe it, they eat it, they're diverse. They're people of color serving communities of color. Lo and behold, one of the things I've run up against with the news outlets that I serve is that it's hard as heck to get them to hire white folks. And the white folks can have all the skills that they're looking for, you know, sales talent, editing talent, but they're not going to let them inside their organization because they are uncomfortable, awkward, and they're afraid. They don't want other folks out from the outside all up in their business. And so it's been really, really interesting to work, and that was not something I anticipated. So the coaching and mentoring has been different. But I will say this, I want to go back to an earlier question, Richard. One of the things I am afraid of, one of the things I do fear, is that we have a lot of organizations out here, not including some of the folks on this call, who lack the cultural competency, right? They lack the cultural competency to address some of these issues. They don't know how some of these hyperlocal publications are structured. They're not familiar with some of the concerns that they may have about opening up their books, for example, to funders to see their budgets and so forth. Especially white funders. They're very uncomfortable with that. So we have to meet people where they are and meet them respectfully where they are. The other thing that I'm afraid of, and that we haven't talked about a lot on this call, is replicating a system that we already have, a system that we know is not working, and expecting a different result. So I'm gonna throw that out there and leave that there in case anybody wants to pick it up.
I just want to ask what you mean. Can you be more specific? What system, what broken system are you talking about?
I see a lot of, and I think Michelle mentioned about, you know, picking up a traditional news outlet and then go out on the other side and open up something that's just like the traditional news outlet. So I've seen, and I am seeing startups, new nonprofit organizations launch that look and sound and feel exactly like the for-profit newsrooms, news outlets that are in that very same community. In fact, they even report some of the very same stories in the very same ways. I don't understand I don't understand that the point of launching a new nonprofit newsroom that is doing the exact same kind of journalism, the exact same kind of way as the for-profit operation is down the street. And that's what worries me.
Okay. All right, we're moving toward our introductions, introducing ourselves. Let's hear from the people who haven't said anything first, like Jackie Green, our producer. You have any, introduce yourself, Jackie.
Interesting conversation, Richard. Particularly, a lot of you missed our lead-in conversation before we kind of got on the air, per se. And we talked a little bit about the business, per se, from the startup of USA Today and how it was a disruptor to the business and how we've transitioned into this new era. And we had a brief conversation about what's next, which you've been talking about. It's a fascinating conversation here. I would challenge some of you to say, you know, when we had 8 tracks, people thought that, wow, that's going to replace other media. Then we had the, cassette. Then we had the CD. And they said music is going to die, and it kept moving. But when you look back now, Apple reinvented itself in a way and said, maybe we changed the business model. Since everyone doesn't want to have every song on an album or CD. If we charge 99 cents, we might do more. Look at the business now. Think about how that technology and the mindset changed the industry. And now we don't have discussions anymore about copyright in that sense. But the music industry is making quite a bit of money. A similar thing transitioned through the movie business. And we said, okay, now that we have, videotapes, the, movie theaters will go away and we'll have no more big films. But we do. So my thinking here is, and this is my favorite topic about change and how the industry is changing here. I wouldn't say that it's gone, it's dead. I would say that this is an exciting time, a challenging time, and we have to figure out the new frontier, and that you're all in this now. This is that experimental stage. And the issue is, who will be here in 2 years? Will any of you be here in 2 years?
Okay, Danielle, you wanted to say?
Oh, I was gonna, he said it well. You know, but I will say on the music, I totally agree with everything he said, but on the music side, it's hard, you know, it's hard sometimes to hear about how we need to do better and get the return by improving our product. We should improve our product because we should improve our product. But you, in the music industry, everybody gets paid a nickel when you have your song playing in an elevator. Everybody, no matter who you are, no matter how good your product is, if it plays, that means there's value. That means that you get paid. So it's an expectation, and it has to be an expectation of our industry. And then if you want more and, you know, you have a premium, then you'll charge for tours or, you know, whatever movie rights like Beyonce does. But nobody's telling Beyonce to sing better. You know, she has an expectation. She gets to get paid just like every indie artist or any individual does. Yes, there's record labels involved. Forget about them. You get an expectation, you get paid because it's the market. And the marketplace is broken for us. It's a big problem. And I don't mean to light myself on fire, but I fight this every day, and in the courts, you know, it's gone in the wrong direction for a decade. I feel like it'll start going in a better direction. AI, I think, is a little different. Laymen even get it. Wait, this seems unfair. And it is unfair. You're not getting paid for anything. That's a fundamental problem with our marketplace. So I'll keep fighting. But it's just, it's a real problem.
Okay, Roger Witherspoon. Tell us who you are and if you have any thoughts to offer.
Thank you, Rich. It's good to see you all again. I've been around since there were dinosaurs back in the 60s.
Roger.
It's interesting when you talk about disrupting a newsroom. I mean, I was usually the first Black person they'd hired. And in some places, no, in some places the reaction was, if you can kick my ass, you can stay. And okay, that's fine. So I look at what is happening now, and I'm concerned that there is too much, it seems to me, too much emphasis on copying social media and not doing the kind of in-depth work that we always did, not covering the Board of Ed, for example, or anything else local. I see too much, what's the crime of the week, and other things, and I don't know where we fit in going forward.
Okay, thank you. Donna Fuentes.
Yes, this has been wonderful. It's always great to be thinking and hearing all these great minds and everything. I guess the biggest thing I'm thinking is I agree with most of you all who see this as a challenge. We can always, there's always problems, right, in our industry. There always seem to be, but I do see it as a big challenge. And the biggest thing I think we all need to hold on to is the journalism of verification. That's what we hear. The medium is changing, and it's always been changing. But the biggest thing I think we need to do as veterans, that's what we all are here, is encouraging our young folks to stick to the verification rules. Everything needs to be verified. Social media, everybody who retweets is responsible for checking what they're sending out. I mean, from the very littlest things. And that's what I always tell people. You think you're not reporters, you are. Everybody became a reporter when the internet everybody became the internet. That means all of you became reporters, which means you all have to verify what you're sending. And so they sort of think about that for a minute and go, wait a minute. I said, don't you trust something because it comes from a friend of yours? Just a little bit more than a wild person. And so think about that. That means people are trusting you. It's a matter of trust. And that's what we're responsible for as journalists. And you all have a right to trust what you're reading, what you're seeing, what you're hearing. So you're responsible for that now. And anyway, I argue verification. That's what we really have to teach now is trust. And hold on, we'll get through it. We always do. Oh, yes, I didn't tell people, you're right, that I'm executive director of IRE, Investigative Reporters and Editors. That's my official job. But I've been a journalist for more than 35 years, mostly in Texas. And I'm coming from San
I'm
Antonio.
still wearing my IRE a sweatshirt here about DEI.
You will be in NICA.
DEI.
DBEI Symposium. Yeah, that's our fall thing. We're going to be in NICAR. We're in Baltimore next week already. Hope to see some of you there. And our fellowship application where we pay for the travel and stay for IRE, which is Anaheim this year in June. That's you have until April 1, IRE.org. Somebody of y'all are interested in attending, please fill out the fellowship. We're always looking for people to come and get trained. Can't hear you, Richard.
Oh, sorry. Sandra Hominick. Can you hear it? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hi, y'all.
Okay.
So I'm Sandra Hominick. I'm a director of partnerships for the Chronicle of Philanthropy. I work with a small segment of that organization focused on building partnerships and fellowships. And a really, really good conversation. It reminded me of my start and where I am now. I started in radio and television, then moved to newspapers, and then of course digital. And people used to ask me, which do you like better? And I always said, I think each one plays an important role. You need to layer them together. You need to have them work together to be able to tell the full story of a community. So I'm trying to be optimistic about our future, and I probably only have a few more years left in the business, but I still have mentored dozens of young folks who are still trying to find their way in the business. So I'm remaining optimistic. I would like to ask that we be careful about pitting nonprofits versus profit, legacy versus non-legacy. And remember that they all employ journalists.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we should be focused on. And unfortunately, right now, whatever the state of the legacy media is, they still employ a lot of journalists. And so we need to figure out a way to work together to bring out the best parts of each of those and try to stitch them together. So that's my optimism. And if you ask me tomorrow, I may not be this optimistic.
Okay, thank you, Sandra. Sharon Farmer.
Yo, and power to the people, people to the power. Truly, things have changed since I was a young kid about this journalism stuff. But I'm going to tell you, photojournalism is not dead because a picture can still tell 1,000 terms.
Yeah, Sharon is our photographer.
And I'm enjoying everything I keep dealing with y'all talking about because nobody else talks about what Journal-isms Roundtable tells about. So I'm very keen on what's good news, and that's us. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Sharon. Anthony Wilson. I think you were driving, so I don't know if you can.
Yes, I am in a car, and I think you're probably going to hear a lot of road noise. If you do, please tell me, and I'll make this very brief. I've really appreciated all the perspectives that we've been hearing this evening, particularly when we're talking about what we're going to do with these young people who are coming up in the business. And again, apologies, you can't see me because I'm in the middle of Texas somewhere on the road. No lights. But what
is your day job, by the way?
Future of the business. Oh, my day job, I am the morning reporter and weekend morning anchor at ABC 11. That's the ABC/Disney-owned television station in the Raleigh-Durham market.
Okay.
So I also, in addition to that, mentor some of these young folks we've been talking about this morning or this afternoon. Sorry, I'm in a different time zone. And I'm very concerned when I hear some of the things that veterans are saying. I'm also encouraged when I hear that we are all still trying to shift to a model where the journalist can be more in control of his or her destiny and developing those skills that make them more marketable and make them able to survive in this very challenging environment that we're all facing. It's discouraging to think that, as we've heard this evening, a lot of people are pivoting toward entertainment rather than good old shoe leather reporting and covering City Hall and covering the state legislature. These are the places where the decisions are made. I was watching on MSNBC today, shocked to see some of these people who are swallowing some of the Russian propaganda, no other way of putting it, that's been put out there by certain people, because they apparently don't have good newspaper in their town, or they're not critical thinkers, or both. But when you don't have that kind of research, it's done by people who know what they're doing in journalism, and some people are left to their own devices, you wind up with the situation we're facing right now. That said, I do appreciate all the advice and the perspectives we've been hearing this evening. I plan to pass some of those on when I am teaching some students at North Carolina A&T State University in Greensboro, North Carolina. Next month, it'll be our 31st year of trying to teach those kids what they're going to face and trying to help them stay employed. So I've been taking mental notes. I'll be passing a lot of the wisdom I'm hearing here on to those students. And of course, coming back to work myself after this vacation I'm on, much more refreshed and renewed and ready to keep fighting.
All right. Thank you, Anthony. Appreciate that. Keep your eyes on the road.
I'm not driving. I'm
okay, cool. All right, Lynn Adrian.
Hi,
Oh,
I'm
you gotta unmute.
I think I'm unmuted.
Okay.
I'm on the board for Journal-isms, and I am recently retired from running the graduate broadcast and digital journalism program in Washington for the Newhouse School at Syracuse. And I have a lot of thoughts that are related. Not sure where any of this specifically takes us. I'll start with the fact that in the last years that I taught the journalism program in Washington for Syracuse, these are graduate students, and the majority of them, even though we were training them to be local television journalists, they did not watch local television before they really got to Syracuse for that year.
White Alice was just saying that.
They do get their information from other types of media platforms like Instagram and TikTok and other things like that. They have to be reminded that they're using those platforms as aggregators, and that somebody else actually did the reporting that they see appearing on those small screens that they go to. But there are other people who are wisely using those platforms to send information out. And some of that information is bogus. I also have concerns about other actors like Brightgram and Patch and other people like that. Maybe not so much Patch, but Brightgram and sites like that who show up in email. Well, for older people, because we're the ones who read email, and it shows up in a daily feed, and a lot of it's crime and negative, and you have to do a number of clicks to find out who actually owns those sites and who's pushing that content. These are people who see that there is a local news desert, and they're trying to fill it from an agenda. And we're going to have to be aware of that these are people who are putting on the role of journalists, but they aren't really, because those two are people who are aggregators, taking stuff from police reports or maybe from a Nextdoor site, which often is nothing but bad news. So there's that. And then I guess finally, the thing I would say in terms of the model, what's going forward, and we have to think about what's next. Maybe it's things like ProPublica, along with the other types of reporting we're doing. If you're talking about building trust, ProPublica pays a certain number of journalists to do deep dives on stories and come out with meaningful, impactful stories. And then they go on to the next thing, but that's just one thing at a time. Is that a model that can be adopted in a hyper-local way? I don't know. And people like Tracy could talk about that. But if we're talking about going back to or building up the model that was there before with broadcast news and newspapers and stuff like that, that's backward looking. Sorry, that ship sailed. We have to figure out what's going forward and look to other people. They may not be people who directly work in journalism, may work in communication in other ways, and have other ideas about distributing content that's meaningful while we still do the good journalism practices.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. Elliot Francis.
Exactly. She's right.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Elliot Francis, I've been a broadcast or TV and radio news reporter for over.
Tell us where you are, because we can see the background there of the streets and all.
I'm in a place called Henderson, Nevada, which is about 30 miles or make it 30 minutes south of the Las Vegas Valley. Relocated here from Washington, D.C. about 2 years ago, in semi-retirement. But I was a news anchor reporter for 45 years of various outlets. I'm currently the producer, host of Now with Elliot Francis, streamed live each week over Facebook and YouTube. One thing I wanted to point out, first of all, I agree with Jackie and Diane in that things are changing, as we all know, but it's an exciting time. And I do believe that we'll get back to the basics at one point or another with some help and some diligence. But it reminds me of a conversation that I had with one of my bosses some years ago, the great John Johnson, CEO, publisher of Johnson Publishing Company, when a conversation with me once suggested that it's time for certification of journalists. So in other words, we now have this that has turned almost everybody into a reporter, or so they think. However, as we've explained here, they don't know the basics. They don't know the basics of the craft that we know. Well, certification, much in the same way that meteorologists are certified, you understand that this person has demonstrated a competency about the basics of the craft, and you can rely on this person to give you honest, objective, fact-based information. And that's for news organizations as well as consumers. And if you don't see the seal, then maybe you go someplace else to a news daddy. I think somebody mentioned that here today, and you get your entertainment. And it feels like it's news, but it's really not. So separating the wheat from the chaff, so to speak, so we can go forward with a clear idea of where to get your news and where not to get it. Those and other things I'm sure will bring us back to the circle at some point or another. But good conversation.
Thank you. Bala Baptiste.
Richard, thank you. Your diligence, I think it's almost 25 years, huh? Outstanding. Huh?
Thank you.
Keep up the good
It's been a while. It's been a while. Let's leave it at that.
Colleagues, how y'all doing? My name is Bala Baptiste. I'm a professor and chair of the Division of Communications at Miles College, which is near Birmingham. Well, I jotted down a few things as conversation progressed. I'm going to come from the perspective of the younger people. They want it easy. They want immediate results. They want stresslessness. They're impatient and in some respects lacking ethics. There's so many things to comment on, but I won't. I'm just going to leave it to, we're talking about AI. I was teaching and I asked a student to go to Google and to look up whether or not a person who's convicted of a crime can run for the presidency. Well, it took him all about 3 seconds. And he read to me that there's no law saying that it can't happen and so forth and so on. I said, wow, that was great. Where'd you get it from? He says, ChatGIT. GPT. It's a great tool, but also we have to have some restraints. Well, just to close this out, what I've done is I've pulled out the old blue book. That is, it's a booklet where the students write their responses. You don't like it, but they're not cheating. They're actually thinking about what it is. So consequence and accountability, we have to make certain that the future journalists recognize that throughout their training and when they get to the field, if they in fact do, they have to be accountable. And if they're not, there are some consequences. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Baptiste. David Willard.
Okay, let me unmute. Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for allowing me to join you. I'm good friends with Jackie Green and with Cynthia Robbins, and they told me about this. And I said that, yeah, I would really like to join you guys this evening. Just sit in, hear the conversation. I'm a longtime proponent of media, particularly media for African Americans. I am by profession, I'm an educator, long-term, going close to 30 years. And one of my main focuses in my teaching and in being an educator has to encourage people, young people, to read and to understand what they read and be able to comprehend what they read and to read far and wide everything that they can get their hands on. As probably all of you know, that is a hard challenge in today's time. Kids don't really like to read. They see it as a boring and arduous task. And they a lot of times don't want to engage in that activity, which is harmful to society. It's harmful to them and their successes as to where they want to go in life, and it's harmful to us as a society to not have well-read young men and women coming out of these schools. Just want to offer you guys with a few little things in terms of coming at it from that angle. I just returned from San Francisco literally on Sunday from a conference called Teaching Engaged Brains. And the whole conference was geared towards how do teachers and educators get to kids who are inundated with information, much more so than we were when we were young, and who have this sort of TikTok mindset when it comes to engaging with information. Kids have an attention span now, and this might shock you, of 40 seconds. Adults are at 53 seconds. We change screens and switch screens on average 570 times per day, adults and young people alike. Young people even more so than that. But one thing to keep in mind, and I've done this in my classroom to a great deal of success, old media is new media to today's generation that we're going after. They didn't grow up with magazines. They didn't necessarily grow up with books. They didn't grow up with newspapers. All they know is how we're conversing with one another here. And for them, a magazine or a newspaper or something along those lines can be a new form to them if we come at it from a way that they understand. And that is by, I think, combining what you guys are talking about, the old-fashioned journalism, well-written stories that engage them and come at them with what they're interested in, but combining that with the tools of technology that they have at their fingertips today. I'm going to sign off, but I'm going to leave you with this one thing. I think Jackie said that I'm trying to put together a bound version of a magazine for African-American males to be given, the audience being African-American males 14 to 18 years old. This has never been attempted before in our history, to never sort of do something like this before in our history. I did it in one of my classrooms back about 8 or 9 years ago. I put together a 187-page bound publication that I did myself with a young artist here who did the layout for me. I wanted to spice up my short story unit that I present to them every year. I put together this magazine, but I combined it with, at the time, which was sort of cutting edge, QR codes and with AI components in it. So that if you took your phone or your tablet and you scrolled over the name of the magazine, which was open, then like a hologram, whatever it is that you had filmed or whatever it is that you had made a video of would literally rise off of the page onto your phone, onto your tablet. The QR codes, I had a woman who is a very active environmentalist here in Texas that I knew well. She's now on the board of the National Parks Conservancy. I did an interview with her via video, not via video. I did a one-to-one interview with her. I wrote an article about the importance of environmentalism and protecting the environment and how kids need to take a great interest in this. I recorded the interview with her. And then if you scanned a QR code, you actually went and saw the interview itself. You saw the discussion that she and I had about this particular topic. So I put it in the laps of my kids when it got to the short story unit, and they absolutely ate this up. Some of these kids had basically never seen a magazine in their lives. And then when you combined it with this technological component, something that they knew and loved and really, had grown up with, it was something that was completely new to them. So I'm going to sign off and say that what you're doing is extremely important. You guys know that. It has to remain vital and alive, but we have to look at ways of combining it with what these kids know today and what they use and deal with every day in and out, minute by minute, second by second. Thank you guys for having me again. If any of you all want to talk further with me about this, I'm going to send my email to you guys via the chat and reach out to me, and I'd love to talk further about this situation. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I'm glad you were with us today. Hazel Trice Edney, are you there? You see a picture.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Richard. This has been a great conversation. I mean, how many years ago was it that I decided to strike out on my own and own my own newswire, the Tri-Edney Newswire and Tri-Edney Communications? One of the best decisions I've ever made. However, I miss being able to actually do that shoe level leather reporting that I used to do when I was working under George Curry, the great George Curry at NNPA, and doing that investigative journalism. And George said I was really, really, he said I was good at it, but I just don't get a chance to really do it anymore. And so I don't know what to do about that except to try to grow my business bigger to the extent that I can hire another president and CEO of Tri-Edney Communications, and that I can get back out there and do the reporting that that I really desire to do. There's so many stories that we're missing. I also teach at the Kathy Hughes School of Communications at Howard University, and I have this semester 4 interns. I really think that we are in danger of not teaching them enough about those magazines. I teach multicultural media history, which is an opportunity to show them the work of the John H. Johnsons and Ebony and Jet and Simeon Booker and the George Careys in Emerge, etc. And whoever said that it's like they have never seen a magazine. It's amazing when I get A. Peter Bailey to come into the classroom and show them he has a collection of volume 1 number 1s of Black magazines. It's an amazing collection that he's about to sell. I would love to buy it. But anyway, when he passes the Ebony's volume 1 number 1s around the classroom, they're combing through it like it's just a piece of museum material, and it really is. It really is. But what's the museum about it is not just the fact that it's a magazine that is like come off of the internet. It's like something they can hold in their hand. But what's museum about it is the actual stories, the headlines, the in-depth. And right now they're reading the stories of Emmett Till in Emerge, as written by George Curry, and the story of Kimba Smith in Emerge as published by George. And so we have to teach them how to think deeply. That is one thing that I think is missing, because social media has taught them to think quick and entertaining, and just say something that's cute and powerful and just put it out there. But they don't know what they don't know, and so those of us who consider ourselves veterans have the responsibility of pulling them along and making them and molding them into what they should be and must be for this country.
You're here. You're here. For those who don't know, NNPA, where Hazel once was and George Curry, is the National Newspaper Publishers Association, which is the organization for publishers of the Black press. And A. Peter Bailey was once a colleague of Malcolm X, and edited the newspaper and went on to be in the Black press. And one time he was president of the NABJ chapter in New York.
Yes,
So
he also worked for Ebony. He worked for John H. Johnson.
Oh, that's right. And right.
So he
There
had
you
an
go.
opportunity to tell them about those experiences, etc. It was really great.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, last word goes to Cynthia Robbins, unless I left somebody else out. Cynthia, are you there? Okay, maybe you don't get the last word. All right. All right. Well, thanks everybody we're about 9 minutes over. Thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks to those who are watching on Facebook and who will be watching later on YouTube. The chat room was very vigorous. And I plan to print that out, and everybody who's on the call will get a copy of that. And those who are on Facebook and would like to see the chat room as well, and just message me. So thanks everybody. We can find out what happened in the Michigan primary tonight. If you haven't already, I haven't yet. And thanks for being with us. We have a couple more days left of February, and then we'll be getting ready for another roundtable in March. So thanks everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Richard.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.